The air inside the grand ballroom was thick with anticipation as guests sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries under the glittering chandeliers. The evening was meant to be a celebration, an annual charity gala bringing together the world's most influential figures for a good cause. But no one could have predicted how quickly things would spiral into chaos. Keanu Reeves, the star everyone had been waiting for, was in the room. His name alone was enough to send a ripple through the crowd. The Hollywood icon, known for his humility and kindness, was a rare sight at these events, which made his presence all the more remarkable. Conversations shifted, whispers spread, and eyes turned as Keanu made his way through the crowd, exchanging smiles and greetings with fans and colleagues alike. His quiet charm and easygoing nature put everyone at ease, except for one person. Jason Hunter, CEO of a booming tech empire, stood across the room watching with narrowed eyes. Jason wasn't just another high-powered executive in a tailored suit. He was a man who carried an unspoken reputation. Cold, calculated, and ruthless, he had built his empire through sheer force of will. But tonight, something about the sight of Keanu made his chest tighten with unease. The two men had a history, one that hadn't been discussed publicly, but one that was as real as the tension that now hung between them. They had been friends once, but that was before the deal went south, before the betrayal. Jason's hand gripped his glass a little too tightly, his jaw set in a firm line. He had heard the whispers over the years, the stories about Keanu's image, how the actor was always the good guy, how he gave millions to charity, treated his fans with respect, and walked away from Hollywood's toxic spotlight. Jason hated it. Hated how the world adored Keanu. Hated that Keanu seemed to be the one who got away with everything, while Jason had to claw his way to the top, leaving behind anyone who had ever dared to cross him. Tonight was supposed to be about his company, about expanding his influence. He'd invested millions in the charity and hoped to solidify his position among the elite. But there, standing near the corner of the room, was the man who had made him question everything. A man who had once been his closest friend. The gala's organizers had ensured everything was perfect. Lavish decorations, an orchestra playing, soft tunes in the background, and a guest list that read like a who's who of the business world. Yet Jason's focus was locked on Keanu, who was now surrounded by adoring fans and industry insiders. A sudden voice interrupted his thoughts. "Jason, you okay?" It was Emily, his assistant and right-hand woman. She had been with him through the ups and downs, always there to keep him on track. But even she couldn't ignore the storm brewing in Jason's eyes. "I'm fine," Jason muttered, his gaze still fixed on Keanu. "Just thinking about how much this evening matters." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you're really thinking about? Or is it about him?" She glanced toward Keanu, her expression betraying just a hint of curiosity. Jason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving Keanu. He felt something stir inside him, a mix of anger, jealousy, and regret. The man standing over there, looking so at ease, so beloved by everyone, was the same person who had left him in the dust years ago. It had been a business deal, a big one that Jason had worked on tirelessly, thinking it would solidify his company's future. But Keanu had backed out at the last minute, leaving Jason to handle the fallout alone. The betrayal had stung more than he'd ever admitted, to anyone. As the evening wore on, Jason's frustration continued to simmer beneath the surface. His colleagues approached him one by one, offering congratulations for his recent success, but all he could think about was Keanu. The man who had everything: public adoration, personal peace, and a career that seemed to only get better with time. Jason had worked twice as hard, and yet here he was, still fighting for validation. Finally, the moment came. Keanu, after finishing his conversation with a group of investors, turned and spotted Jason across the room. There was a brief moment of eye contact, a silent exchange that seemed to last forever. In that instant, Jason's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of years of resentment pushing down on him. Without thinking, he began to make his way through the crowd. Emily watched him, a look of concern crossing her face. "Jason, don't," she whispered, but it was too late. As Jason approached, Keanu turned to face him. There was a flicker of recognition. In Keanu's eyes, a hint of something softer, something familiar, but it didn't matter. "Keanu," Jason's voice was low, almost a growl. "We need to talk." Keanu's smile didn't falter. "Jason, it's been a long time." His voice was calm, smooth, the kind of voice that could diffuse any situation. But Jason wasn't looking for peace. Not tonight. "I think we both know why we're here," Jason said, his words clipped. The tension was palpable, and as the silence stretched between them, the surrounding guests began to take notice. Keanu's gaze shifted slightly, his posture relaxed, but there was something in his eyes that Jason didn't understand. Was it pity, or was it something else? Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, the unthinkable happened. Jason Hunter, CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, did something no one could have anticipated. He spat, right at Keanu Reeves. The sound echoed in the room. A collective gasp went up from the guests as Keanu recoiled, his face showing nothing but quiet disbelief. The entire ballroom froze. No one moved, no one spoke. For a split second, it was as if time had stopped. And in that moment, Jason Hunter realized he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The gala, meant to be a night of charity and celebration, had turned into something much darker. And no one knew how it would end. The room remained suspended in shock, frozen in a moment of disbelief. The spat had landed, a grotesque symbol of everything that had built up between Jason and Keanu over the years. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the culmination of years of pent-up resentment, hidden beneath the surface of a friendship that once seemed unbreakable. Keanu stood still for a moment, his face pale, the drop of spit on his suit a stark contrast to his otherwise composed demeanor. His expression, though calm, revealed a subtle shift, a brief flash of pain behind his eyes, but that was all. He said nothing, made no move to retaliate. Instead, he wiped his suit silently, his fingers trembling just slightly as he did so. Jason, meanwhile, seemed almost to snap out of a trance, realizing what he had just done. The reality of the situation began to settle in, and for the first time that night he felt his chest tighten with guilt. But it wasn't the guilt of an apology, or the kind of remorse that would prompt someone to make amends. No, this was the guilt of someone who had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. "Jason." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was enough to break through his haze. She was standing beside him now, her hand on his arm, urging him to step away from the chaos. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The room began to buzz with hushed conversations, some guests whispering in disbelief, others quickly pulling out their phones to capture the moment. A few people approached Keanu, offering their apologies and trying to defuse the situation. But Keanu simply nodded, his calmness now taking on an almost otherworldly quality. As Jason turned to leave, his mind raced, flooded with memories of a time when things between him and Keanu had been very different, before the money, the power, and the betrayal. It had all started years ago, back when Jason was just another ambitious young entrepreneur fighting for a seat at the table. He had met Keanu during a time when both of them were still finding their footing in the business world. Keanu, fresh off the success of his blockbuster films, and Jason, climbing the corporate ladder with relentless determination. They had met at a tech event, of all places, a gathering of investors and startup gurus. Jason had admired Keanu, not just for his film career, but for the way he carried himself, humble, grounded, and free from the usual trappings of fame. At first, Keanu had been everything Jason was not, easygoing, patient, and unafraid to step away from the hustle when necessary. Keanu wasn't obsessed with money or success, and yet he had it all. Jason had never quite understood that. It was one of the things that had initially drawn him to Keanu. They'd struck up a conversation, and over time, a friendship had formed. But it didn't take long for that friendship to evolve into something more complicated. Jason, whose drive was fueled by his desire for power and control, began to see Keanu as an enigma. How could someone like him, someone with so much at his disposal, be so disconnected from the game Jason was playing. Keanu didn't care about the next big deal, the next acquisition, or the ever-elusive title of most successful. Jason did. And that difference, that chasm between their worlds, had started to sow the seeds of discord. The breaking point came when Keanu walked away from a partnership that Jason had worked tirelessly to secure. It had been a multi-million-dollar deal, one that would have skyrocketed Jason's company into new realms of influence. They had been in talks for months, and Jason had believed that Keanu's involvement was the final piece of the puzzle. But, just as things were about to go public, Keanu had pulled out. There was no warning, no explanation. Keanu simply decided it wasn't the right time for him to be involved. To Jason, it felt like betrayal. He had invested his time, his reputation, and his energy into what he thought was a shared vision, and Keanu had just walked away without so much as a second thought. That was the moment Jason began to see Keanu, not as a friend, but as a threat, a symbol of everything he despised about the Hollywood elite. Keanu's carefree attitude toward money and success had become an affront to Jason's relentless pursuit of both. What was Keanu's downfall, Jason wondered? What would it take for him to understand the game? But Keanu didn't care. He never asked for an apology, never tried to make amends for the deal that went south. And Jason's pride wouldn't allow him to reach out, not after everything he had invested. The friendship, once strong and filled with mutual respect, had deteriorated into a painful reminder of the man Jason had become, and the man Keanu refused to be. The more Jason thought about it, the angrier he became. And tonight, it all came rushing back, a flood of resentment that boiled over into that single impulsive act. As the evening wore on, Jason retreated to a quiet corner of the gala. His mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. But beneath the anger, there was something else, something he didn't want to admit. He felt small. Keanu, on the other hand, had disappeared from sight. The guests were still talking about the incident, but Keanu was nowhere to be found. Was he leaving? Had the humiliation been enough to send him packing? Jason didn't know. He didn't even know if he cared anymore. What he did know was that there would be consequences. There had to be. And deep down he understood that those consequences would go far beyond the fallout from a single moment of madness at a charity gala. Jason could barely breathe as he stared into his champagne glass, the golden liquid swirling in slow motion, reflecting the lights of the ballroom. The scene had unfolded like a nightmare, and yet it was all too real. His heart hammered in his chest, and his mind raced, replaying that moment again and again. He could feel the weight of the gazes on him, the whispers. The eyes of the world, it seemed, were on him now. The charity gala, once a night to cement. His place among the elite had transformed into a spectacle. The eyes of social media were already buzzing with footage of the spat, the images of Keanu, untouched and dignified, contrasting sharply with Jason's impulsive outburst. Jason could hear the murmur of reporters, the tick of camera shutters, and the digital rush of people sharing the incident online. It was everywhere. But none of it mattered. None of the flashbulbs or whispers could drown out the gnawing emptiness in his chest. He had crossed a line, the line between being a powerful CEO and a man lost in his own insecurities. Jason? Emily's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him from his downward spiral. She was standing in front of him, her face serious, her eyes wide with concern. "We need to talk." He didn't even look up. Instead, he took another sip of his drink, his hands shaky now. He hated this feeling. Weakness. Regret. He wasn't used to feeling small. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "Fine," Emily repeated, her tone softening. She crouched in front of him, trying to meet his gaze. "Jason, you're not fine. You just humiliated yourself in front of everyone, your company, your image. Everything is at risk right now. People are already calling this a scandal." Jason clenched his jaw. "Let them talk," he growled, though the bitterness in his voice betrayed the truth. He was angry, yes, but it was an anger that he knew he could no longer direct at anyone else. Not now. Not after what he had done. Emily exhaled slowly. The reality of the situation finally sinking in. I'm not talking about your pride right now. I'm talking about your reputation, Jason. You just spat at Keanu Reeves. Keanu, the man who everyone loves. What were you thinking? Jason's hands curled into fists, but he didn't answer. What could he say? He had let his emotions cloud his judgment. He'd let jealousy, bitterness, and regret consume him to the point where nothing else mattered. Keanu had been the embodiment of everything Jason had wanted. Success, fame, peace. And it ate away at him that Keanu seemed to achieve it without the same ruthless ambition that Jason had spent his whole life cultivating. Keanu had always been the good guy, the person everyone adored, and in that moment it felt like Jason had been overlooked in the pursuit of that image. "I don't need a lecture, Emily," Jason muttered, his voice low. "I know what I did. But I'm not going to apologize for it." Emily stood back, her eyes full of disappointment, but she didn't argue. She knew him too well to expect an apology, at least not yet. "You'll have to apologize, Jason," she said quietly, her tone firm. "Not just to Keanu, but to your investors, your employees, everyone who looks up to you. You've made yourself the story tonight, and if you don't fix this, it could cost you everything." Meanwhile, Keanu had vanished from the gala floor. The whispers about the incident were only getting louder, and the guests who had once surrounded the actor now seemed to scatter, as though avoiding any involvement in the storm that Jason had created. Emily had tried to find Keanu after the incident, but he had already left the venue, his car pulling away before anyone could catch up to him. Keanu's departure didn't go unnoticed. If anything, it only heightened the tension. People wanted to know what had happened, what Keanu's response had been, but Keanu wasn't one to engage in drama, and Jason knew that. The actor would handle this his own way, quietly, away from the media circus. Jason's mind drifted to Keanu's face as he stood there, shocked and still. It was almost as if Keanu had expected this from him, as if he had known exactly how Jason was going to react. Had he seen the resentment, the anger that had been building inside Jason for years? Had Keanu known that the betrayal would come back in the form of an outburst like this? Jason slammed his glass onto the table in frustration, the liquid spilling over the edge. "Damn it," he hissed, his mind racing with the consequences of his actions. This wasn't just about a ruined evening. This was about everything he had built over the years, his reputation, his business, his network. It was all at risk. If this incident spread the way he feared it would, his empire could collapse in the blink of an eye. The next morning, Jason woke up to a nightmare. His phone buzzed incessantly, a barrage of missed calls and notifications. As soon as he checked his email, he was met with an avalanche of angry messages from business partners, investors, and even employees. Everyone was asking the same question. What happened last night? The tabloids had a field day. Headlines like, "CEO humiliates Keanu," "Reeves in front of Gala guests," and "Scandal at charity event. CEO's shocking outburst could cost him his empire," plastered every news outlet. Social media wasn't any better. People were calling him names, blaming him for ruining the event, and in some cases calling for his resignation. The digital world was in a frenzy, and Jason was the center of it all. Then came the message from Keanu's publicist. It was simple. "Keanu has no comment at this time." It didn't take much to decipher. Keanu had chosen silence, as expected, and Jason, he had chosen to make an irreversible statement. Emily was the first to reach out. "We need to fix this. We have to issue an apology, and you need to call Keanu. Make it personal." Jason stood by the window of his penthouse, staring out at the city below, unable to shake the image of Keanu's calm face. He knew she was right. He needed to do something. But what could he possibly say to fix this? Was there even a way back? His fingers hovered over the keys of his phone, the weight of what he had done pressing down on him. This was more than a PR mess. This was personal. And deep down, Jason knew this wasn't just about salvaging his career. It was about confronting the jealousy and bitterness that had festered for far too long. Jason sat at his sleek glass desk, the morning sun casting a pale glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His office, usually a sanctuary of power and control, now felt suffocating. He could barely focus on the spreadsheets in front of him. His mind kept drifting back to the incident at the gala. The crowd's gasps, the coldness in Keanu's eyes, the immediate backlash that had followed. He could still hear Emily's voice in his head, still feel the weight of the judgment from every corner of his world. His phone lay on the desk, its screen cracked with notifications and messages. He had avoided them long enough, and now he couldn't ignore them any longer. The longer he put off confronting the situation, the worse it would get. The first message he opened was from Emily. "Call Keanu. Apologize. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be." He hesitated. The thought of calling Keanu after everything that had happened felt impossible. He had humiliated him in front of everyone they both knew, and yet Emily was right. He had to make this right. If there was any hope of salvaging his reputation, his career, or even his sense of self-respect. Jason took a deep breath, picked up his phone, and dialed the number he had never thought he would need to call. The phone rang once, twice, and then the familiar calm voice on the other end. "Jason," Keanu answered, his tone even, unbothered, as if the events of the night before had never happened. "Keanu," Jason's voice cracked, betraying his nerves. I don't even know what to say. Keanu cut him off gently. "I don't need an explanation, Jason." Jason swallowed hard, his throat dry. "It wasn't about you. It never was. I don't know what came over me last night. I was wrong, and I am so sorry." For a moment there was silence. Jason held his breath, waiting for Keanu's response, preparing himself for whatever rebuke might come next. Then, Keanu's voice broke the silence, quieter than before. "I know I'm not angry at you, Jason, but you need to understand something. I don't want an apology because it's the right thing to do. I don't want you to apologize for the sake of your reputation." Jason's stomach tightened. He had been expecting this, yet the word stung more than he anticipated. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're apologizing because you need to, not because the world needs to hear it. You need to face what you did, own it, and learn from it." Keanu's words were firm, but not without compassion. There was no venom in his voice, just a raw honesty that Jason wasn't sure he deserved. Jason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle deep within him. This wasn't going to be easy. He had always been about power, control, and winning, but now he had to confront something much deeper, his own insecurities, his own fragility. He had let pride guide his actions, and that pride had been his downfall. "I've been looking at all the wrong things for so long," Jason said quietly. "I don't even recognize the person I've become." Keanu's voice softened. "It's not too late to change, Jason, but you have to do it for yourself, not for the press, not for anyone else, for you." Jason nodded, though Keanu couldn't see it. "You're right, I've been blind." A heavy silence lingered between them, but this time it felt different. It wasn't filled with tension or regret, but with understanding. "I appreciate you saying that," Jason said finally, "and I'm going to do better. I swear it." Keanu let out a sigh, the tension in his voice dissipating. "I believe you." With that, the call ended. Jason sat in his office, his mind swirling, but something had shifted within him. The sting of his actions hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, he didn't feel like the weight of it was going to crush him. He had taken the first step toward redemption, and for once it felt like it was for the right reasons. Later that day, Jason called an emergency meeting with his PR team. He knew this would be a long road, but it was the road he needed to take. He needed to address the public, not just with a formal apology, but with authenticity. This wasn't going to be some scripted statement for the tabloids. No, this was his chance to rebuild, not just his image, but the parts of himself that he had neglected for so long. "I want to take full responsibility," Jason began, standing before his team in the sleek conference room. "Not just for the incident, but for everything that led up to it. I've let my pride and insecurities cloud my judgment for far too long. This wasn't about Keanu. It was about me. It was about my need to prove something that didn't matter." His PR manager, Michelle, nodded but spoke cautiously. "This will be tough to spin. The media is still very much focused on the drama. You'll need to show the public that you've changed." Jason met her gaze, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm not trying to spin anything. I just want to show them the real me. No more pretending." As the meeting progressed, Jason worked with the team to craft a public statement. It would be a difficult one, but it would also be genuine. He was ready to take ownership, not just of the incident, but of everything he had neglected to confront until now. The statement would address the hurt he caused, explain the personal journey that led him to make such a reckless mistake, and most importantly, show his commitment to making things right. The following day, Jason posted the statement online, his hands trembling as he clicked send. The flood of notifications started immediately, likes, shares, comments. Some were sympathetic, some were skeptical, but the response was overwhelmingly mixed. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Jason had taken the first step toward healing, not just for his career, but for his soul. But the hardest part, that was still ahead. Jason knew the road to redemption was a long one, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But he was committed to it. And this time, it was about more than saving face. This was about reclaiming who he had lost along the way. As the days passed, the scandal began to fade from the headlines. Keanu's silence had been more powerful than any public statement. He hadn't needed to say anything. His dignified retreat from the spotlight had done the talking for him. Meanwhile, Jason kept his word. He met with employees, hosted town halls, and appeared in interviews, continuing to own his mistakes. Slowly, the public's perception began to shift. Jason had learned something invaluable from all this. Power wasn't just about control and ambition. It was about vulnerability, owning your mistakes and knowing when to ask for forgiveness. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of leader people respected the most. The weeks following the Gala debacle felt like an endless series of public appearances and interviews for Jason. Each day he worked tirelessly to prove to the world, and more importantly to himself, that he could be the person he had lost sight of. But despite his efforts, he still couldn't shake the memory of Keanu's silence. Jason had expected the apology to be the hardest part, and to an extent, it was. But what followed? The long wait for the media frenzy to subside, the public skepticism, the personal doubt, proved to be an even bigger challenge. He was constantly in the public eye, making adjustments and taking ownership of his mistakes, but there was always this gnawing sense that he hadn't quite done enough. And then, just as he was beginning to settle into the rhythm of redemption, an unexpected message appeared on his phone. It was from Keanu. Jason blinked in disbelief. He hadn't heard from Keanu since that phone call, and the actor's name had barely made an appearance in the media since the gala. To be honest, Jason had almost convinced himself that Keanu would never speak to him again, at least not directly. So when he saw the notification, his heart skipped a beat. "Keanu, I think we should meet. It's time to talk." Jason's stomach dropped. Meeting in person. Was Keanu finally ready to address the incident head-on? Jason didn't know what to expect, but whatever it was, he knew this was his chance to set things right, not just for the world, but for his own peace of mind. He quickly typed back, "I'm available whenever you are. Just let me know where." The C. Next afternoon, Jason found himself standing outside a quiet, upscale cafe in the heart of the city, waiting for Keanu. It was a neutral setting, neither too formal nor too casual, which made sense given the gravity of their conversation. Jason's palms were sweaty, his mind racing. What could Keanu possibly want to say to him? Keanu arrived a few minutes later, his usual calm demeanor intact. He wore a simple jacket, jeans, and a pair of sunglasses. Though he removed them the moment he stepped inside, Jason stood as Keanu approached, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Keanu," Jason said, his voice more uncertain than he'd meant it to be. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Keanu smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with the same warmth Jason had seen from him in the past. "It's nothing, Jason. Let's just talk." They sat at a small table near the back of the cafe. The air was light, and yet Jason could feel the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. He opened his mouth, but Keanu spoke first. "I want to be clear, Jason," Keanu began. his voice calm and even, but with a hint of something deeper. "What happened at the gala wasn't just about the spit. It was about a lot more, and I think you know that." Jason nodded slowly. He had thought about this moment countless times, about the deeper issues behind his actions. He had spent weeks reflecting on his life, his choices, and the insecurities that had led him to lash out. But hearing Keanu say it out loud made it all too real. "I've been driven by so many things," Jason admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fear of losing control, fear of being overshadowed. But I can't keep using those as excuses. I've hurt people, I've hurt you, and I know I can't take that back." Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, looking out the window for a moment before meeting Jason's eyes again. "You're right," Keanu said finally, his tone thoughtful. "But here's the thing. That's not the first time I've seen someone get caught in their own ego. The truth is, we're all driven by our own demons, whether we're in the public eye or not, but it's how we handle them that matters." Jason was silent for a moment, his heart heavy with the weight of Keanu's words. He had been so wrapped up in proving himself that he hadn't stopped to consider what he might have been losing in the process. His entire focus had been on winning, on showing the world that he was untouchable, that no one could match his ambition. But now, he realized, he had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be vulnerable, to admit failure, to seek forgiveness. "I don't know if I can fix all the damage I've caused," Jason said quietly, almost to himself. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "The first step is knowing that you can't fix everything, but you can change how you move forward, and that's the most important part." Jason nodded slowly. There was a sincerity in Keanu's words that he hadn't expected. He had thought Keanu would be angry, resentful even. But instead, there was this quiet understanding and acceptance that Jason had made a mistake, one that couldn't be erased with words, but perhaps with actions. "I've learned that it's not about being perfect," Keanu continued. "It's about showing up even when you're flawed, even when you're vulnerable. And you're showing up, Jason, that's what counts." Jason took a deep breath. He had thought he had to do everything on his own, that he had to hide behind the facade of power and success. But Keanu had made him see something different, something he had buried for too long. "I want to do better," Jason said, his voice firmer now. "Not just for my company, but for myself, for the people who look up to me, for the people I've hurt." Keanu smiled, his eyes softening. "You've got this. It won't be easy, but you've already started. And that's what matters." Jason sat back, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't going to make everything right overnight, but it was a start, a real one this time. For the first time in a long while, Jason felt like he was on the right path. As the conversation drifted to lighter topics, Jason couldn't help but think back to the words Keanu had shared. They were simple, but powerful. It wasn't about pretending to be someone he wasn't. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, learning and growing, even in the face of failure. Keanu had offered him not just forgiveness, but the kind of understanding that Jason had long been searching for. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin healing the wounds he had created, not just with others, but with himself. Weeks passed, and the public narrative around Jason's scandal began to evolve. The media shifted from outrage to curiosity, and slowly, the tides of public opinion started to turn. Jason wasn't just showing up to press conferences or speaking at company events. He was genuinely engaging, seeking to be the man he had once forgotten how to be. But this journey wasn't just about smoothing over the image that had taken a hit. It was deeper. It was about healing relationships, finding forgiveness in the eyes of those he had wronged, and most importantly, forgiving himself. Jason was making strides. He had attended therapy sessions, he'd surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of people who held him accountable, and his interactions with his employees and colleagues were becoming more genuine, less about controlling every situation. But there was one person he needed to make things right with more than anyone else: Emily. Emily had been with him through everything. She had watched him climb to the top, seen the best of him, and the worst of him. And though she had stood by him, her patience was wearing thin. She wasn't the type to tell him what he wanted to hear. She was honest, perhaps too honest at times, but that was exactly why Jason respected her. She had texted him once, weeks after the Gala incident. "I'm proud of the work you're doing. Just don't forget why you're doing it." That was all just a simple reminder that Jason was still on the right track, but there was a distance in those words, a distance that Jason couldn't ignore. He had taken her advice to heart. He wasn't doing this for the press or for his own reputation anymore. He was doing it for Emily, for the people who had believed in him from the beginning, and most importantly, for the man he wanted to become. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Jason found himself at a cozy bar near his office. Emily had agreed to meet him there after work, and he felt a mixture of anticipation and nerves. He hadn't seen her much lately, and the thought of their conversation made him uneasy. What if it wasn't enough? What if he had missed his chance, as E? He entered the dimly lit bar. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Emily. She sat at a corner table, a glass of wine in hand, looking calm but distant. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he approached her, his breath catching slightly as he pulled out the chair across from her. "Hey," Jason greeted, forcing a smile. Emily looked up at him, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Hey." There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with the weight of the words they both knew had to be said. "I'm sorry," Jason said quietly, his voice sincere. "I know I've said it before, but it doesn't feel like enough. I've been so wrapped up in my own world, trying to fix things for everyone else, that I forgot the most important thing. I forgot to fix the things I've broken within myself. And I forgot to be the person you once believed in." Emily took a sip of her wine, her gaze never leaving his. "Jason, I don't need a grand apology. I need you to keep showing up. I need to see that you're not doing this because it's the right thing to do or because the media is watching. I need to see that you're doing this because you want to be better for yourself." Jason nodded, feeling the sting of her words, but understanding them all the same. He had been on a journey of redemption, but he had been doing it in public for the world to see. It was time he started doing it for the people who mattered most, people like Emily. "I want to be better, not just for the press, not just for the company, but for you, Emily," Jason said, his voice earnest. "I've been so selfish. I've been focused on everything except what matters." She set her wineglass down and leaned forward, her eyes softening. "You can't change everything overnight, but you've started. That's all that matters right now. What you do next, how you act, how you treat others, that's the real measure of who you've become." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. It was so simple yet so profound. He had spent so much of his life trying to prove himself, trying to control the narrative. But now Emily was reminding him that true growth wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. It was about learning from mistakes and showing up every day even when it was hard. "I won't stop trying," Jason promised, "and I won't forget what I've learned." Emily smiled then, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Good. That's all I need to hear." The weight that had settled in Jason's chest lifted just a little. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just another step. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path, not just for his career, but for his life. Later that week, Jason attended a charity event, one that wasn't about him but about making a difference in the community. It was a small gathering, but important nonetheless. He had learned a valuable lesson from the Gala incident. True power didn't lie in lavish parties and media attention. It lay in making real, lasting changes in the lives of others. As he mingled with the guests, he saw some familiar faces. But the person who caught his eye the most was Keanu, who was standing by the refreshments table, laughing with a group of people. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Jason felt a shift, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken. Keanu didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. Jason walked over to him, offering a handshake, which Keanu accepted with a nod of recognition. "You're doing good work, Jason," Keanu said, his voice quiet but sincere. "Keep going." Jason smiled. "Thanks, Keanu. I'm trying." And with that simple exchange, Jason knew this was only the beginning of the man he was becoming. The redemption he had fought for was no longer just about regaining his public image. It was about truly becoming the person he had always wanted to be. Jason's journey of redemption, though deeply personal, had never been confined to just his own growth. The public had watched him stumble, witnessed his lowest point, and now they were watching as he tried to pull himself back together. For a time it seemed like the world's eyes were on him, waiting for him to fail. They had seen him as the arrogant, self-absorbed CEO. Could he really change? Could he really redeem himself in the eyes of the public? But as Jason continued to work on himself, the narrative was slowly shifting. It wasn't about his actions at the gala anymore. It wasn't just about the headline-grabbing incident that had nearly destroyed his reputation. Now the focus was on his efforts to improve, his public and personal commitment to making things right. Yet the journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. Every time Jason thought things were looking up, a new challenge would arise, threatening to undo his progress. It was one late afternoon when Jason sat down with his team for what he thought would be a regular strategy meeting. Little did he know the topic of conversation would take a turn he wasn't quite prepared for. His public relations manager, Sarah, opened the meeting with a frown. "Jason, we've been getting some negative feedback again. Not about the charity work or your public appearances. This time it's more personal." Jason leaned forward, his heart sinking. "What do you mean? What's going on now?" Sarah hesitated before continuing. "It's the way people perceive you, and I don't mean the public at large. I mean your closest circle, your employees, your clients. They see the effort, but there's still a lingering doubt. They're wondering if it's real, if this isn't just another phase, a PR stunt." Jason's stomach churned. "Are they doubting my commitment?" "It's not so much doubt as it is skepticism," Sarah explained, her voice soft but clear. "People want to believe in your transformation, Jason. But they need to see it in every action you take, not just the words. They want to see consistency, not just sporadic charity work or random appearances. They want to feel that they're part of this journey too." Jason took a deep breath, trying to swallow the sense of frustration that had crept up inside him. He thought he was doing everything right, wasn't he? He had been more open, more accessible. He'd shared his story, his struggles, his growth. And yet, it still wasn't enough. "You know how hard I've been working, Sarah," Jason said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've given everything I've got to change. What more do they want from me?" Sarah gave him a knowing look. "It's not about what you've given, Jason. It's about showing up consistently. It's about proving that this is who you are now, not just someone trying to clean up their mess. The world doesn't trust easy fixes. People want to see that your actions are aligned with the man you're becoming." Jason was silent for a long moment, letting her words sink in. She was right, of course. He had taken the steps to redeem himself in his personal life, but his professional life was still a mess. He had used his power, his wealth to manipulate situations. He had put his ambitions above everything, and now he had to prove that the man he was becoming wasn't just a character he played in front of the cameras. "I understand," Jason said finally. "I'll step it up. More transparency, more accountability. I'll make sure my actions reflect the person I'm trying to be." Sarah nodded, relieved by his response. "That's what people need to see, Jason. It's going to take time, but I know you can do it. Just don't let your frustration get in the way. Trust the process." As the meeting wrapped up, Jason couldn't shake the sense of urgency that had settled in his chest. Time was running out. If he didn't prove to everyone, his team, his clients, his peers, that his transformation was real, then it would all have been for nothing. Later that evening, Jason sat alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline. He felt the weight of his responsibilities more than ever before. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to not let it slip away. But he knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Redemption didn't happen in a vacuum. It required commitment, it required sacrifice, and it required something, more vulnerability. Jason's mind kept returning to one of the most important lessons he had learned on his journey so far. Showing up wasn't enough. It wasn't about checking boxes on a to-do list. It was about making real, lasting change, and real change came from within. As he reflected on the past few months, he realized just how far he had come. There had been a time when he couldn't see beyond his own ambitions, when he was blinded by the thirst for power and control. But now he saw the value in collaboration, in humility, in being part of something greater than himself. But there was still something missing. He thought of Emily. He thought of Keanu. Both had been crucial to his transformation, but in different ways. Emily had been his anchor, reminding him of the core values that had gotten lost in his pursuit of success. Keanu, on the other hand, had shown him that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it, accepting it, and then moving forward. As Jason sat there, a realization hit him. To truly change, to complete this journey, he needed to come full circle. He needed to bring his personal growth into the company. He needed to show his employees, his clients, and his partners that this transformation wasn't just about him. It was about creating a culture of integrity, transparency, and accountability. The next day, Jason took a bold step. He called an emergency company-wide meeting. The room buzzed with curiosity as employees filed in, wondering what this sudden gathering was about. When Jason entered the room, he felt every eye on him, every whisper fading as he took his place at the front. "I've been thinking a lot about the company's future," Jason began, his voice calm but firm, "and I've come to a realization. This company isn't just about profits or success. It's about the people who work here and the values we stand for. I've been focused on climbing to the top, but I've neglected what matters most, the people who helped me get there. I'm committed to doing better, for all of you. We're going to make transparency, collaboration, and integrity the foundation of everything we do." There was a brief silence before a few murmurs of agreement filled the room. Jason wasn't sure if the employees believed him yet, but he wasn't concerned about that. It wasn't about convincing them in that moment. It was about showing them, over time, that he meant it. "I know I've made mistakes," Jason continued, "but I'm asking for your trust. We're in this together, and together, we can make this company something we're all proud of." The room seemed to exhale collectively. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it was a start. Jason knew it was just one step, but it was a crucial one. As he left the meeting, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. His journey was far from over, but he was on the right path. And this time, he wasn't just doing it for the cameras. He was doing it for the people who had believed in him all along. The weeks that followed Jason's speech to his employees were filled with ups and downs, but the overall shift in the company was palpable. There was a new energy in the office, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Jason knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was working. His transparency was being met with cautious optimism, and the open dialogue he encouraged was bringing people closer together. His commitment to change was no longer just a personal mission, it was a company-wide initiative. But just as Jason was beginning to feel like he had a handle on things, a crisis struck. It wasn't something that could be fixed by another motivational speech or another grand gesture. It was something far more challenging, a situation that would test everything he had worked for. It all started with a major partnership, the kind of deal that would secure the company's future for years to come. Jason had spent months negotiating with a key investor, someone who had the potential to change the game for his company. The deal was almost finalized. Jason was confident, too confident. One morning, just days before the contract was set to be signed, Sarah stormed into his office, her face pale with worry. "We've got a problem," she said, her voice tight. "The investor pulled out." Jason froze, the air thick with disbelief. "What do you mean, pulled out? We were supposed to sign today." "I don't have all the details yet, but they've backed out. Something came up. And it's not looking good for us. This is the kind of thing that could make the press, Jason. We've already been under scrutiny for the Gala incident, and it's going to make everything look like a disaster." Jason's mind raced. This wasn't just a setback. This was a major blow to his company's future, and it had the potential to unravel everything he had been working so hard to rebuild. He could feel the weight of the failure settling in his chest. "Did we find out why?" he asked, trying to focus. They're saying it's because of the way we've handled recent press around you, the charity work, the scandal, everything. They're worried about the long-term image of the company. Jason felt a rush of frustration. All the progress he'd made, his commitment to transparency, the way he had started to show up as the person he wanted to be, was now being called into question. It felt as though no matter how much he changed, the past was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to sabotage him. "We can't lose this deal," Jason said, his voice low, his mind working at full speed. "We need to find a way to fix this," Sarah nodded. "I'll do what I can on my end, but the truth is, it's going to take more than just some press releases or apologies. You need to make this right, for real." Jason understood. He had already come to realize that redemption wasn't just about saying the right things. It was about showing through his actions that he had truly changed. And now, with the company's future on the line, he would have to prove it. That evening, Jason sat down with Emily. He hadn't shared the full details of the situation with her yet, but he knew she'd be able to offer perspective that he desperately needed. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but tinged with frustration, "I've hit a wall. We had this deal in place with an investor, but they just pulled out. And it's all because of my past. I'm so sick of it. I've done the work, I've changed, but it feels like no one cares." Emily looked at him, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Jason, change doesn't come with guarantees. People don't just forgive and forget. You've been given a second chance, but now you need to prove you can sustain that change. It's not about doing it for a week, a month, or even a year. It's about building a future where your actions speak louder than any headline." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. Emily was right. He had been so focused on the idea of redemption that he hadn't considered the long-term work it would take to maintain it. This wasn't just about getting through the crisis. It was about proving that his transformation was real, and that it wasn't just an act. It wasn't just a recovery from a single mistake. It was an ongoing process. "I've been so fixated on making the right public moves, but I haven't focused enough on the relationships that matter. The people who are actually here day in and day out working beside me. I've taken them for granted. I've been so focused on changing my image that I forgot about the heart of the company," Jason admitted. Emily nodded. "It's not too late to fix it, but you need to stop chasing the approval of people who don't matter and focus on the ones who do. Show the people around you that you're in this for the long haul, not just for the next good headline. And then maybe the right people will start to take notice." Jason let her words settle in. Emily wasn't telling him to back down or accept failure. She was reminding him to go deeper, to focus on the foundation of his values and the people who mattered most to him. It was time to stop playing the game of public perception and start building something real, something sustainable. The next day, Jason called an emergency meeting with his top leadership team. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't downplay the situation. He laid it all out. The company was facing a crisis, and they needed to act fast to stabilize everything. "We've been given an opportunity to prove something. We've got to show that we're more than just the scandal we survived. We are a company built on integrity, innovation, and transparency. And we need to lead with those values now more than ever," Jason said, his voice clear and determined. His team listened intently as Jason outlined the next steps. He called for a re-evaluation of every business relationship they had, every potential investor, every partnership. It wasn't just about securing a deal. It was about making sure their foundation was strong enough to weather future storms. He knew that the world wouldn't forget his past mistakes overnight, but he wasn't going to let that define him anymore. As the meeting concluded, Jason felt a sense of purpose return to him. He wasn't going to allow this crisis to destroy everything he had worked for. He was going to face it head-on with transparency and humility and rebuild trust from the ground up. In the coming weeks, Jason and his team worked tirelessly to recover from the setback. They reached out to other investors, shared their renewed vision for the future, and doubled down on the values that Jason had been promoting within the company. Slowly but surely, they began to win back the confidence of their partners, and then, just when Jason was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around, An unexpected phone call came through. It was from the investor who had pulled out. They were reconsidering the deal. The phone call from the investor sent a wave of disbelief through Jason. He was in his office when Sarah relayed the news, her face a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. "They're willing to give us another chance," Sarah said, barely able to contain her excitement. "They want to sit down. They've heard about all the steps we've taken since the pullout and they're reconsidering. But Jason, this is it. This is your chance to show them everything you've been working toward. If you fail this time, there might not be another opportunity." Jason took a deep breath. This was the moment. He'd been tested more times than he could count, but this was the final test. Everything he had worked for, the late nights, the hard conversations, the apologies, the promises, had led up to this point. His redemption would no longer be just a personal journey. It was now a corporate one. The future of the company, the lives of his employees and his legacy all hung in the balance. The meeting was scheduled for that Thursday morning. Jason spent the night preparing, going over every detail, rehearsing every possible question that could come his way. He was determined to not only convince the investor of the company's potential, but to also show that the transformation was real, his and the company's. As he sat in the conference room waiting for the investor to arrive, Jason's mind raced. He couldn't help but think back to the dark days after the Gala incident, when everything seemed lost. He thought about the people who had stood by, him, Emily, Keanu, Sarah, and he realized something profound. Redemption wasn't just about winning back favor. It was about living with integrity every single day. It was about being true to who he had become, even when it was hard. Finally, the investor arrived. Jason stood to greet him, shaking his hand firmly. They exchanged pleasantries, but the weight of the conversation hung in the air. The investor wasted no time. "I've been following your company closely," he began, his tone measured. "I've seen the positive changes, the focus on transparency, and the steps you've taken toward rebuilding your reputation. But let's be clear, I'm not interested in doing business with someone who is only motivated by the desire for image restoration." Jason nodded. He had expected this line of questioning. "I understand. I know that my past actions have raised questions, and I can't change what happened. But what I can do is show you the company I'm building now. This isn't just about me. It's about the values we stand for and the people we employ. We've built something real here, not just a facade. The lessons I've learned have reshaped my leadership, and I want to make sure this company reflects that." The investor raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening," Jason continued, outlining the company's new strategic initiatives, its commitment to social responsibility, and the changes he had implemented within the company's culture. "We're no longer just focused on the bottom line," he said, his voice steady and confident. "We're focused on long-term sustainability, ethical practices, and most importantly, our people. The mistakes of the past have taught me that it's not enough to be successful. You have to be a good leader. You have to care about the people you lead and the communities you impact." For the next hour, the conversation delved deep into the specifics of the company's new direction. Jason wasn't just selling an idea, he was selling the truth. Every word he spoke was backed by actions, every promise supported by tangible results. As the meeting wore on, he could feel the investors' skepticism start to fade. They were no longer just talking about numbers, they were talking about values, about a shared vision for the future. By the time the meeting ended, Jason was exhausted, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had been open, honest, and transparent, just as he had promised he would be. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but he also knew that this moment, this meeting, was a turning point. His transformation was no longer just a personal story. It was now embedded in the fabric of the company. The next day, Jason received the email he had been waiting for. The investor had agreed to move forward with the deal. It was a huge victory, not just for the company but for Jason himself. It was the final validation he had been seeking. His past didn't define him, his actions did. As Jason sat at his desk reading the email, he felt a flood of emotions: relief, gratitude, and above all, pride. He had earned this moment, and it was a testament to everything he had overcome. Later that afternoon, he walked into the company's main office where his team was waiting for him. He didn't need to say much. His face said it all. "We did it," he said, his voice full of emotion. "We've secured the deal. We're moving forward." There was a collective cheer from the team. They had been with him every step of the way, and now they were reaping the rewards of their hard work. 2. Jason could see the pride in their eyes. This wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for everyone. The next few months were a whirlwind. The deal with the investor brought much-needed stability, and the company's reputation continued to improve. But the most significant change wasn't in the bottom line or in the headlines. It was in the culture of the company itself. Jason had transformed from a self-centered CEO into a leader who truly cared about the people around him. And that made all the difference. Through it all, Emily remained by his side, a constant source of support. And Keanu, who had remained a quiet but powerful presence in Jason's journey, reached out with a message that encapsulated everything Jason had learned along the way. "I'm proud of you," Keanu wrote in a letter. "But more than that, I'm proud of the man you've become. Not just for what you've achieved, but for the person you are now. Keep going. You're doing more than you think." Jason smiled as he read the words. He had come full circle. He had faced his past, confronted his flaws, and emerged stronger for it. And now he was ready for whatever the future held. The road ahead would have its challenges, of course, but Jason was no longer afraid of them. He had learned that true success wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing the lessons that came with it and using them to grow. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and a team that believed in him, Jason set his sights on the future, knowing that no matter what happened, he was ready. Not just to lead, but to lead with integrity, to lead with heart. Because redemption wasn't just about coming back from a fall, it was about rising higher than before.